Butch Breaks Down. Butch Breakdown is a tow truck. He works for the Sodor Recovery Unit. His job is to rescue any road vehicle that breaks down or has an accident. He then takes them back to the garage so that they can be fixed and cleaned. Sometimes Butch can be a bit too full of himself. One day Rosie was waiting by the Sodor Recovery garage. Her signal was red. Just then Butch stopped beside her. Rosie was surprised. She had never seen Butch before.
Hello,
she smiled.
Who are you?
I'm Butch, smiled the tow truck. Who are you?
I'm Rosie,
smiled Rosie.
I work here on the Fat Controller's Railway.
Butch was impressed. He often never got to talk to many of the Fat Controller's engines.
What are you doing today?
asked Rosie. The same thing I do every day, said Butch. I go out to rescue any vehicle that needs my help. Then I'll bring them back here to be fixed. Rosie liked the sound of this.
I'd like to rescue a broken down vehicle,
she puffed.
It would be fun.
Butch chuckled. You? Rescue a vehicle? He laughed. That'll be the day. This made Rosie cross. She didn't like being laughed at.
I'm good at rescuing too,
she huffed. You can't rescue a vehicle, chuckled Butch.
And why not?
asked Rosie crossly. Because you can't leave the rails, explained Butch. Engines rescuing vehicles, that is funny. Then Rosie's signal changed to green. She was pleased when it was time to go. Huffed Rosie as she puffed away. Then the recovery unit manager arrived to see Butch. Butch, your new winch has arrived at the docks, he said. Go and get it fixed on and then you can start your work. Yes sir, on the way sir, said Butch. His driver revved his engine and Butch vroomed away. Butch chugged happily along the road. He was excited about getting his new winch. I can't wait to get my new winch, he smiled. I'll show how useful my new winch can be. He began to speed up a bit. Steady, Butch, said his driver. You'll get there on time. Otherwise, if we run into trouble, you will be stuck. But Butch wasn't listening. He was thinking about his new winch. He couldn't wait to try it out. At last, he arrived at Brandon Docks. Toby was there collecting bags of flour to deliver to the schools. Toby was pleased to see Butch. Hello, Butch, smiled Toby, ringing his bell. Greetings, tooted Butch. I'm here to collect a new winch. Is it here? It's over there, said Toby. Butch looked and saw a new winch lying on a crate. Hooray! He cheered. Right then, Butch, said his driver. Let's get it fixed up. Butch was excited. So the workmen went to work taking out the old winch and fitting in the new one. It took a long time and Butch was itching to go. Then he heard a whistle. It was Rosie. She was delivering empty trucks for Salty to shunt. Rosie was pleased to see Toby.
Hello, Toby,
she whistled happily. Toby rang his bell to say hello, but when Rosie saw Butch, her smile disappeared.
What are you doing here?
She puffed. I'm collecting a new winch, said Butch. Still want to rescue a vehicle? He teased. Rosie just wished steam. This made her cross.
I may run on rails,
she huffed,
but that doesn't mean I can't rescue vehicles like you.
Butch just sniggered. I never break down, he said. We tow trucks never break down. Before Rosie could reply back, his driver jumped from his cab and came to see Butch. We've had a call from base, he said. Caroline has had an accident. She's stuck in a ditch. We need to go and rescue her at once. Butch revved his engine. He was determined to go. Ready when you are, sir, he said. Your new winch is fixed and ready to go, said a workman. Thank you, said Butch's driver. He climbed on board Butch, and with a screech of his tyres, he was off in a flash. Rosie wasn't impressed at all. Toby was puzzled. What's the matter, Rosie? he asked. Rosie told Toby what Butch had said about her not being able to rescue road vehicles. Toby was surprised to hear this. Take no notice of that, he said, trying to cheer Rosie up. He just likes to think he's the best rescue vehicle on the roads. Then the guard blew his whistle and Toby set off his train. Bye, Rosie, puffed Toby. Rosie watched as Toby puffed out to the docks. She was determined to prove Butch wrong, but she wasn't sure how. Meanwhile, Butch was chugging along the road. He was looking forward to rescuing Caroline. Don't worry, Caroline, he said to himself. I'll have you rescued in no time. At last they arrived at the rescue area. Butch was surprised to see Caroline in the ditch. What's happened? He asked.
I was riding along the road, minding my own business, explained Caroline. But then the soft-sided truck came out of nowhere and made me swerve off the road and into this muddy ditch. Now I'm stuck.
Caroline's driver was speaking to the lorry driver. I'm sorry for making you drive into the ditch, said the truck driver. It's alright, said Caroline's driver. It's my fault for driving a bit too fast. Butch looked at the mess, but he still smiled. Don't worry, Caroline, he chugged. I'll have you out of that ditch. Butch's driver drove Butch into place and then went to work with the winch. Butch's driver felt the ditch water on his overalls, but he still went on. At last the winch was fixed onto Caroline and the driver went back to Butch. Right then, Butch, he said, let's get Caroline out of there. Butch was pleased to hear this. He revved his engine and got ready to pull. What's this? He called to the drivers. The truck driver and Caroline's driver watched as Butch's driver operated the winch. The winch wound in the strong cable. Then Butch heaved and hauled as hard as he could. His cheeks went red and his engine stuttered, but he still kept on. Then, at last, with a squelch, Caroline was out of the ditch. The drivers cheered and Caroline was so happy to be out of the ditch.
Thank you, Butch,
she grinned.
You're a hero.
Butch was so happy he smiled from side to side. Well done, Butch, said his driver. Now we'll take Caroline back to the garage to be cleaned. Yes, sir. Right away, sir, agreed Butch. So Caroline's driver climbed aboard Butch and then Butch set off back to the garage. Butch rode happily along the roads. He felt very proud of himself. Wait till Rosie sees me now, he said to himself. Soon Butch reached the road by the railway line where Bulgy had an incident with chickens and passengers. Then there was trouble. Butch's engine started to splutter. Then he shook and then came to a stop. Then his engine went silent. What's happened? Asked Butch. He was puzzled. His driver got out to look at Butch's engine. It didn't take him long to find the problem. Your battery has gone flat, he said. We'll have to get help. Oh no! sighed Butch. Then he heard a whistle from behind. Oh no! He groaned. I know who that is. And he was right. Rosie puffed alongside the road. Butch's driver waved to Rosie to get her to stop. Rosie stopped beside him.
Oh dear me,
teased Rosie.
What's happened here? Broken down, have you?
Butch didn't say a word. What seems to be the problem? Asked Rosie's driver. Butch has got a flat battery, explained Butch's driver. We need to get back to the garage. Can you help us, please? Rosie was delighted to hear this.
I'll go to the yard and get the breakdown crane,
she smiled.
I'll be back soon.
And Rosie puffed away to collect the cranes. Rosie smiled from buffer to buffer.
Now I'll show Butch that I can rescue road vehicles,
she puffed to herself. Rosie arrived at the shunting yards. The breakdown cranes were standing in a siding. Her driver coupled her up to the train and she set off back to the Butch and Caroline.
Wait till you see me now, Butch,
she said. Soon the cranes went to work. Caroline was loaded onto the breakdown crane's flatbed. Caroline had never been on a flatbed on rails for a long time. The crane then lifted broken down Butch off the road and onto the flatbed in front of the works coach. The workmen tied down both vehicles safely onto the flatbeds and then climbed back on board the coach. Soon they were ready to go. "Right then, Rosie," said her driver, "let's take them both back to the garage."
"Yes, sir,"
smiled Rosie, and blowing her whistle, Rosie puffed happily away to the garage. She felt very pleased to be pulling not just one, but two broken down vehicles. Rosie couldn't help but laugh.
"I thought you tow trucks never broke down,"
Rosie teased. Butch felt very silly, so instead of replying, he just stayed quiet for the rest of the trip home. When they reached the garage, the sun was beginning to set. After Butch was lifted back onto the road, the mechanics pushed and pushed Butch into the garage as hard as they could. Butch was heavy, but soon he was put on the ramp. One mechanic went to work to recharge Butch's battery. "You'll have to have your battery charged overnight," he said. Butch sighed as the mechanic placed the charges on Butch's engine. "Thank you very much for rescuing Butch and Caroline," said the manager.
"It was a pleasure,"
wheezed Rosie.
"I'm always happy to help anyone who needs help."
"Come on then, girl," said Rosie's driver. "Let's get you to the water tower." Rosie agreed. She whistled goodbye and puffed happily away. That night, Butch stayed in the garage feeling very silly. He wished now he hadn't boasted to Rosie so much. "Serves you right for being rude to Rosie," said his driver. "See you in the morning." And he left, leaving Butch feeling bad about what he had said. The next morning, Caroline was happy to be back on the road. She had been washed and cleaned and was now heading back to her home.
"No more stinky ditch smell,"
she grinned. Butch was pleased to have a full battery too. He drove on his way to find Rosie. He knew he had an apology to make. Rosie was at the coaling plant telling her friends all about her rescue. All the engines were very impressed.
"Well done, Rosie,"
smiled Emily.
"You really did save the day." "You are indeed a hero,"
agreed Molly.
"The flight controller is very proud of you,"
put in Percy. Rosie felt very proud of herself. She didn't know what to say. Then they all heard the sound of an engine. Butch rounded the corner and parked next to the track. Rosie wasn't pleased to see him. Butch took a deep breath. "Rosie, I'm sorry I was rude to you yesterday," he apologised. "I guess I was being a bit too boastful." Rosie gave a little smile.
"That's alright," she said. "I'm sorry I teased you."
"I guess steam engines can rescue road vehicles after all," said Butch. "Thank you for rescuing me and Caroline."
"Anytime," smiled Rosie. "But please remember to think before you say next time."
Butch agreed, and all the engines agreed with Rosie.
"It's a good job we engines don't run on batteries,"
smiled Percy.
"Why's that?"
asked Emily.
"Because driver wouldn't know where to put the charger,"
said Percy.
"Engines don't have plug sockets."
All the engines laughed, and even Butch had to chuckle at Percy's joke.